Hey guys, so put up my video previously and got some good feedback about the tank, so I thought I'd do a quick video on how to sort of achieve that winter weathering effect. So what I've got here is just a little bit of plastic card mounted to something I can just hold it with. I've primed it and then just oversprayed with some German grey, just to give it a sort of not even coat essentially of German grey. So the next stage is sort of optional. You can do this stage either after the white or before the white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do sort of this edge in this mode, in this sort of way, and then I'll do the other edge in sort of the after way. So essentially what this is doing is it's preserving the background colour so that it shows through and sort of gives it an effect of the whitewash wearing off. So we do this with sort of the way to do it previously is basically to keep this layer, and you use masking fluid. In this case I've got a pot of Maskol here. This will be quite interesting. I've never actually used this stuff. I've used masking fluid before but not this particular one, so this will be interesting. And you dab it on with a bit of blister foam. So this is literally, I'll just see if I can get it in focus, there we go. This is literally just foam from a blister, or sort of miniatures packing material or something along those lines essentially, and you just wrap it up so you've got an end. Whatever you hold it in is sort of irrelevant. You can do it in your fingers if you really want, but I find just having something like this is quite nice. You can also get the sort of the reverse tweezers, these things which sort of grip when you're not holding them, which they're quite nice. Essentially it's just for sort of dabbing. You've probably come across this technique before as well. So what we'll do is I'll just grab my trusty pot and we will just grab some of this out and just plop it down. It smells foul, this stuff does. It is horrendous. So what you want to do is just get some on the end, and you can see it's quite porous in there. So what you're aiming to do is you're aiming to get a sort of dabbing motion like that. You want it to be sort of relatively sort of dry, so there's not that much on there. So what you're looking to do is just sort of dab along the bottom in a sort of as random as you possibly can kind of way, like this. So there you go. So feel free to sort of go further in on some areas, cover more, that kind of thing. It's all entirely up to you. One thing to consider is, like shining on that quite nicely, where the crew would have walked along the vehicle to get into it, or for maintenance or anything like that, is somewhere that's going to have more wear. Anywhere that sort of they wouldn't have moved is going to have a lot less wear. So if we consider this to be sort of a panel on the vehicle, the edges are much more likely to have wear along them because they've got brushed along hedges. They've been sort of walked on by the crew when they're sort of getting on and off the vehicle, that kind of thing. So we'll put a little bit on like this. Now this stuff does take a while to dry, so once this is dry I'll be back and we'll carry on. So the next stage is going to be, whilst that's just drying, it's actually not too bad really. The next stage is going to be to actually sort of spray the white on, and in this case I'm just using Tamiya's flat white XF2. This is Tamiya paints. I love Tamiya paints, putting them through my airbrush. They are fantastic. They are excellent paints, and I would highly recommend, if you've got an airbrush and you want to sort of take your airbrushing to the next level, I would highly recommend them. They are acrylics, but they're almost not quite water-based. They're a bit odd. I'm not entirely sure what their makeup is, but they have their own thinners. I can't remember the name of it. They've all got these X codes on them. No, I can't seem to find one. Oh, there it is. X20A is the thinner. I just ended up getting quite a large pot of it at some point in time, and as you can see, I do use quite a lot of it. So the next stage is basically going to be doing an overspray of the flat white, and you want it to be quite a sort of what's the word? Thin coat. You want the sort of the original colour to be showing through a little bit, because that sort of shows that the paint is the whitewash is sort of wearing off, rubbing off, and when you're spraying it on, actually that's pretty much dry, to be honest. I could spray over that quite happily. When you're spraying it on, you want it to be quite a thin coat, quite translucent, so that it shows through. So I'll load up the airbrush and we'll get going on it. So again, as usual, this is going to be a bit noisy because it's my airbrush. I'm going to put some thinners in that. Sorry, just getting this ready. I've got a little pot off to one side that I keep my airbrush in when I'm not using it, so it just acts as a sort of stand. So here we are, and yeah, you've got the noise again. So what we're looking for is a sort of really cloudy look like that. So you can see here we've still got the blue coming through off the mat, and luckily this stuff's easy to clean up fairly anyway. So this is the kind of look, that's the kind of look we're looking for. So again, to go along with the sort of markings, you want to try and sort of keep it away from the edge. You don't necessarily want sort of it to go all the way up to the edge when you're sort of manoeuvring the airbrush, because they wouldn't have necessarily done that when they were painting the vehicle. They'd just splashed it on however they wanted. I know some people have got really good looking results literally using a brush and pretending that they're just literally sort of just slopping the paint on, because that's how the people in the original vehicles would have done it. Me, I prefer an airbrush. So here we go. So again, you can see quite clearly through the paint to the base layer beneath, and that's as it should be. And of course you can go right up to the edge like that, if you so desire. So there we go, we'll leave that like that for the moment. So there's our white. What I'll do now is I'll just clean out my airbrush and then we'll be back in a minute. Alright, I'll see you in a minute. Okay, airbrush is cleaned and we're back. So the next stage is going to be sort of in two parts. It's essentially going to be putting the wear and tear on the white finish itself. So in this case we've got the masking fluid at the bottom, and we're going to be running a similar kind of line across the top. So the first thing we're going to do is just remove the masking fluid. So what I've got is just a damp sort of stiff brush. It's not too bad, it should do the trick, and you literally just rub away at the paint and the masking fluid underneath, and you should find that it just comes off. You don't really want to scrub at it too hard, because you run at that point you kind of run the risk of taking off the undercoat entirely, and taking off the base coat, because the water on the brush will reactivate the paint in some situations, and what you'll find is you get this sort of stringy purple stuff coming off it. I think Vallejo do their own version of this, which is green, but I haven't really sort of tried that. So you just keep going like this, and you can see my brush is actually picking up a bit of the white paint, because the white that we just sprayed on is reactivating, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue. You can, if you're careful, you can go in there with a sort of finger or thumb, and there we go, that's clear. Okay, just find the last little bits. There we go. So that's that finish. I'll bring it in a little bit so we can see. Get some light on it. There we go. So as you can see, you've got this lovely sort of edge finish to it, where you can see where all the white's been sort of literally sort of rubbed away and removed, and it looks quite good. I like it. So the second method is pretty much the same, it just misses out the masking fluid. So what I do is, again, this is one I used previously, this is actually the one I used on the tank itself. Again, another bit of foam from a blister pack or something along those lines, and for this version, I've got a palette here. We're going to take some of the original base colour, or at least it's close enough. I used the Tamiya German Grey XF63 to actually base it, and unfortunately this stuff isn't particularly good for brushing on. But hopefully the Vallejo German Grey should be pretty much the same colour, or at least close enough that it's not really going to matter too much. So the way you do this is you just load up the foam. You're going to want to wipe some of this off as well. You don't want too much on there. Think of it like dry brushing really. So we'll just take a bit of tissue and we'll just sort of dab most of it off, and again, that's the kind of effect you're looking for. So this time we just go along the top and tap away again. So it looks like this German Grey is a little bit darker, but no big deal. So maybe a little bit more on there. You can go heavier, of course, if you want, for a more damaged effect. And this, to be honest, this technique works perfectly well for anything you want to do this kind of effect with. Works brilliantly. So there you go. So it's still a little bit shiny because it's wet, but it gives much more of a sort of finer chipped effect. So down here you've got the masking fluid, up here you've got the sort of dabbed on with the foam. And of course the nice thing about doing it with the foam is if you want to simulate scratches, you can do that quite nicely with that kind of motion. Just drag it down very, very gently, and you can sort of scratch the surface like that, and that could simulate maybe on the side of it. If you do it sideways, it can show sort of where the tank's sort of gone through bushes a bit too hard, maybe sort of scratched and dented the paint and things like that. So there you go, there's the sort of two main techniques for getting that kind of effect. So the next stage then is going to be actually weathering the surface. So the way this works is I've got some AK Interactive fluids that I use, and the winter streaking effects and things like that, and I will grab those and show you how to use them. 1 second. And we're back. So these are the AK Interactive fluids that I'm going to use. They're enamel based, as you can see, which means that cleanup is going to be done with white spirit, and also the actual sort of streaking effect. So you can see the winter one gives you a kind of nice greenish effect, and there's the rust streaks, which obviously gives you a sort of brownish reddish effect. So as you can see, they're pretty much sort of colours. They're quite watery, and you can use them straight from the bottle. So we'll go with the winter streaking first, and that's dried up. That's dried up okay. Yeah, that's fine. You obviously, between each of these layers, you want to leave it to dry. And so there you go. It's just a sort of rather nasty looking greenish fluid. So you just take a little bit on a brush. You can use it straight out of the pot for this, and put it on like that. Now it's not going to look much when you first put it on, but okay, so there we go. So what you do next, grab yourself a little bit of white spirit, and I've just got myself a pot that I use, and it's just sort of old white spirit, works quite well. And essentially what you're aiming to do is you just get a brush just sort of damp with white spirit, and you're just aiming to sort of drag it like that. So a little bit of white spirit, wipe most of it off, and then sort of you're feathering the edges of it. Essentially you're looking to sort of almost blend the edges of it in like that, and you can drag the main body down to get longer streaks. This is why I didn't do the streaks all the way to the bottom. You don't need to, because this white spirit will do it for you. And again, ideally you want to be protecting these layers before you do this, otherwise sort of it may, I've never really had a problem with it, but it may take off sort of previous layers or sort of react with them badly and all that kind of thing. So obviously, as you can see, I'm getting quite a green effect on this because I've used this white spirit several times, and it's probably about time I changed this pot, to be honest. But you can kind of see where we're going with this. So you're looking to produce sort of diagonal diamond effect, sort of streaks like that. So you get this lovely, I don't know if the camera's going to focus that close, but you get this lovely sort of streaking effect like that. And if the effect isn't strong enough, to be honest, it's coming out on camera a lot better than it is sort of actually in real life on the model. I mean, this side has almost practically vanished, you can't see it, but on the camera it's actually sort of still there. So it's quite interesting what the camera will pick up and what it won't. So a bit of cleanup. And of course, because this is enamel, you can work with it for quite some time. I mean, I don't know what the sort of eventual working time is of when it dries, but as far as I'm aware, if you haven't sort of sealed it, you can go back in with a bit of white spirit and go in and play with it. So you've got plenty of time to sort of play with this stuff. So we'll give the rust streaks a try, and I'll show you that effect as well. The two work really, really well together, which is handy. So my rust streaks pot is a little skankier. I picked up the winter streaking specifically for that vehicle because I knew I wanted to do it. So obviously the rust streaks, you're not just going to slap it down on a panel somewhere, and there has to be a reason for the rust streaks to be there, like maybe there's a hook on there that's rusting, or it's coming off of a joint or something along those lines. But for this demonstration we're just going to kind of go for it. So again, it's exactly the same procedure. You're just looking to put some on there, and we'll just do that initially. Wash the brush off, not just a damp brush, nothing major, and then just take the edge and just feather the edge off. Now obviously between these effects you could seal it, you could wait for the green to dry and then seal it and then put the brown over the top if you didn't want them to interact, because obviously now that I'm putting this on, I'm going back over it with white spirit, which is going to reactivate the green. and the two of them are going to mix. I'm not too bothered, this is just a sort of for demonstration purposes, but you know, sort of if you're quite happy with the way the green's looking and you don't want to affect it, it might be worth just going in there with a bit of varnish, matte varnish or something, just go over the top of it. Or modelers tend to use floor polish, which is a bit odd. There's a specific brand of floor polish that armour modelers tend to use, Johnson's Clear, K-L-E-A-R. I'm not entirely sure why, I've never really determined. I've managed to get some for myself and it is good stuff, there's no doubt about it, but it is essentially just, you know, sort of gloss varnish, really. It would do pretty much the same thing. So there you go, and that is, in a few easy steps, how you actually create a sort of rusted, streaky, dirty surface that's been prepared for winter. So yeah, you'd obviously want to leave that to dry. You can see it's still shiny in places where the white spirit hasn't dried off yet. Hopefully that was of use to some of you. You know, I think that looks all right. You know, for sort of, what was that, half an hour's work maybe, if that, plus clean up. Yeah, I'm quite pleased. The AK Interactive stuff is fantastic. This stuff, you don't have to use it. You can sort of create your own sort of version of these effects with oil paints and sort of similar thing. You just dab a little bit of oil paint on and then use white spirit or terps to sort of drag it down in the same kind of fashion. Obviously the actual sort of dragging is going to want to obey gravity. You're not going to have sort of, if that's the side of a vehicle, you're not going to have streaks going across it like that. It just wouldn't look realistic. You want them going down the vehicle, so it sort of looks realistic and obeys gravity and all that kind of thing. So there you go. So we've got chipping, wear and tear at the bottom, and then the similar sponging effect at the top. In all honesty, I think I actually prefer the bottom one. Looks a little more realistically chipped than the top did. Anyway, yeah, I might use that on my next few vehicles. But yeah, the white, you don't necessarily have to do it with an airbrush. You can do it with just a normal brush. You just want to get sort of a nice big brush, and sort of just a sort of really huge brush like that, and literally just sort of tap it on like that, and make it, you know, sort of make it look as though the crew's just slapped the paint on, because that's literally what they would have done. They wouldn't have had much time to do this. They'd have been too busy sort of fighting or sort of manoeuvring off to a new place and that kind of thing, so they wouldn't have had a great deal of time to sort of slap the paint on. If you're doing decals, what you can do is essentially sort of the decal would be on top of the grey, and then the whitewash would be on top of that. So what they would probably have done is just have left a sort of small area unpainted in white, so that the markings showed through. And you can show that you can either use sort of this kind of effect, and literally sort of mask over the decal. Obviously make sure that your decal's sealed, otherwise the masking fluid will just lift the decal straight back off again. But there's various ways you can achieve that effect. You could just literally just sort of spray around it or brush around it. This effect doesn't really work because obviously you're sort of going back over the top. This effect down here is removing the white paint. This effect up here is re-adding the grey back on. If you're doing this over the top of a sort of camouflaged vehicle, so you've got the sort of the 2 or 3 colour sort of camouflage lines on it, this way is obviously going to be the best way because it preserves the paint underneath. So what you'd do is you'd paint the vehicle in the camouflage, masking fluid off any areas that you want to look chipped and worn, and then spray white over the top, which is always a bit of a harrowing process when you've just finished painting a vehicle really nicely, and then you cover the whole thing in white paint. So yeah, interesting times. So there you go. Hopefully that has helped some people, and yeah, quite pleased with the way that turned out. Alright, cheers guys.